The NASB 95 has quite a passionate fan base, especially now that the NASB 2020 has been released. It seems like that has just caused NASB 95 users to be even more gung-ho about that specific update of the translation. This was brought out recently in a post from Schuyler Bibles, or someone posted information from evangelicalbible.com, who produces Schuyler Bibles, that this year may be the last year that the Quentel is produced in the NASB 95, and people are reacting strongly to it. So we're going to talk about that a little bit in this video. And I want to get some audience feedback from NASB 95 users as to something in regard to the NASB 2020. So I'll ask that question in this video and would really like to get feedback on it. So here's the information that was shared from evangelicalbible.com. It says the NASB has been revised over time: 1963, 1971, 1977, 1995, and 2020. Like all translations, publishers will be focusing on the current version. Schuyler will have at least one more binding of the NASB 95, which should arrive in September. If the 95 is your favorite translation, you can pre-order a copy now. We will be typesetting the NASB Quentel into the current version 2020 later this year or next. This binding may be the final ado, so order soon. So people were really reacting to this. If they are NASB 95 users, they were quite alarmed by this because it indicates the end of the printing of the NASB 95. Now, someone from Evangelical Bible did clarify that at the end here it says this binding may be the final ado. So they're not saying that this is the final printing of the 95, but it may be the final printing. But if you look earlier too, it says Schuyler will have at least one more binding of the NASB 95. So it's not necessarily the end of the NASB 95 Quentel, but one thing I will say, and I understand why people are reacting, is that obviously Schuyler is indicating that they are moving to the 2020, which is why they're doing the typesetting in the Quentel for the 2020. So clearly, while this may not be the last printing, that's the direction that things seem to be headed. I'll show also another thing that Evangelical Bible put out about the NASB 95 Quentel and all of their printings in the NASB 95. It says Schuyler will continue to publish the Quentel in the 95 as long as there is demand. So that's a key point there. They're saying they will print it as long as there is demand, but will not publish any new typesettings in the 95. So anything that is a new product from Schuyler will be in the NASB 2020. All new settings will be in the current NASB version, the 2020. Lockman is one of the few publishers that permits their older versions, 77 or 95, to be republished. Most publishers allow you to finish off stock of the older version, but do not allow you to reprint. So this final point here kind of shows that Schuyler is in a little bit of a bind because the Lockman Foundation, who produces the NASB, takes a little different approach than a lot of other Bible publishers. And instead of updating their version and saying this is now the one that you have to print, they actually designate their major updates by year, and they allow those to continue to be printed. The problem for Schuyler is determining which one to print. Now, I know that there are some people who would say, just print the 95, that's the best one. And there are probably many people who would say, well, print both. But I'm sure that Schuyler or Evangelical Bible, with its limited resources, really has some tough decisions to make on this. And because they're contemplating these decisions and they're putting it out there as to what they are considering here, people are reacting strongly at the thought of the NASB 95 no longer being published by Evangelical Bible. The thing to realize, though, is that the NASB now is in its 2020 update. That really is the current NASB, whether people prefer that or not. So I mentioned at the beginning there's something I wanted to get feedback about from those who use the NASB 95, and it actually has to do with the gender issue. I believe that is the main issue that people have taken issue with the NASB update, the 2020, is what could be considered gender accurate language. So something that I've talked about before is that if you're talking about gender neutral, typically that means that there is a concerted effort, kind of an agenda, to make sure that everything that you portray in the Bible is as gender neutral as possible. But gender accurate, just to delineate that a little bit, is when you say, well, we're not trying to be gender neutral. We don't have an agenda here. We want to reflect accurately what the author intended when he used a particular word. So if Paul, for example, was talking to men and women, but he used a term that has a masculine root, do you translate that in a masculine manner, or do you reflect his intended audience? And those are the kind of considerations that translators now, especially with the change of usage in English, the way that we use language in English has changed over time. You don't hear man or men used today very much to refer to all people in general. The way that we use English today is to refer specifically to the genders that we are talking about. So that kind of creates a conundrum for Bible translators, because it could cause confusion when a person reads a Bible today and Paul says, brothers, I'm asking you to do this. A lot of people off the street who don't know the Bible very well, they just pick up a Bible. They don't necessarily know if this is referring to only men or men and women. But I want to show something here from one of the translators of the NASB, who I believe helped with the latest update as well. And it's about the gender language. And my question is related to this. So let me just show you what he says first, and then I want to get feedback from NASB 95 users. So this is from Don Wilkins. He posted this in the New American Standard Bible group. And I'm just going to read the first part here, because it gives you a sense of where he's coming from. He says, I see that folks keep asking here about gender translation in the 2020. I've commented on it before, but at the risk of writing a dissertation, maybe it would help to repeat some things and address some others that have been mentioned. First, we wanted to update brethren, which was actually a gender-inclusive term, members of a profession, society, etc., to cover both men and mixed company as needed. We considered a lot of possibilities, but as I recently noted in another discussion, English can be surprisingly limited in the pool of words available with just the right feel. Aside from being inaccurate, the alternatives suggested just didn't have the warmth of brothers, so we went with that. So he's saying there that if they used a term that didn't include the idea of brothers, that wouldn't be as accurate. So he says, we wanted to bring out gender accuracy as clarified by the choice of the original Greek, Hebrew, and the context, and this led to the decision to add "and sisters" in italic and the other changes that have been noted. The italic was essential to let readers know that the words are not actually in the Greek, of course. Contextual factors included whether women must have been present and addressed, or not present or excluded. So that gives you a sense of where the translators were coming from when they updated the NASB to the 2020. And I think what you can see with that is there's really no agenda there. It's not like they're trying to push for something or trying to be, acceptable to modern people or some sort of modern agenda. I think really they're trying to just say, let's update the NASB to current English usage and make it as clear as possible for readers today. So something I want to throw out here, and this probably is something that people won't necessarily agree with, but it's something I was thinking about, that the NASB 2020 update is really akin to the 95 update in 1995. I am old enough to remember when there were still people using these and thous in prayer, for example. I do remember that as a child, but that was really waning as I grew older and became pretty much obsolete by the 1990s. And that's reflected in the NASB 95. The earlier NASB editions had these and thous, particularly in places like the Psalms. But because that was no longer used in English, they decided in the 95 they were no longer going to have these and thous in their translation. So it was an English usage issue that led them to update the NASB 95 in the way that they did. And I would say in many ways it's the same thing with the NASB 2020. The English usage when it comes to the word man, for example, really has changed over time. And now, today, we have to remember this is 25 years or more after the 95 came out. The way that people use terminology has changed a bit. And the NASB 2020 is reflecting that. I will say, too, I think they've taken the most delicate approach they could have taken, particularly on the word adelphoi, which they translate in some cases as brothers and sisters. They made sure that if they put and sisters in there, because it's implied, that they added that in italic font. So that's pretty transparent in the way that they have conveyed their translation, in the way they've portrayed that term. They're saying, on a very literal technical level, you could say it means brothers, but in the context, it can refer to brothers and sisters, and that's reflected in how they translated it. And in certain cases, put and sisters in italic. So there you go. I mean, I get why people are reacting, but I don't necessarily understand why people are reacting as vehemently and as harshly as they are in certain cases. So here's my question that I've been building up to this whole time. And my question is, if the NASB 2020 update did not include and sisters in italic font, and they didn't make any effort to be gender accurate, would you be adverse to the update as much as you are now? And if you would be, if you could set the gender issue aside and you would be adverse to the NASB 2020 update for other reasons, I'd love to hear in the comments section what those reasons are. Now, one stipulation I'm going to put on this is that you can't go right now to try to figure out something that you dislike about the NASB 2020. This has to be something that you've already considered, because I'm assuming if you don't like the NASB 2020, you already have good, sound reasons for that. So I want to hear in the comments, what are your present reasons aside from gender, the gender issue? And I'm sure there are going to be some people, probably a few people, that can give me some reasons they've really thought through that are very clear. And I'd love to see that in the comments section if you have some very specific things that really are indicative of, something that's a problem from the 95 to the 2020 in your mind. But I think a lot of people probably won't really have anything other than maybe what they've had through hearsay. So I'm kind of testing things out just to see what the response is here, because I'm really curious. Now, if the gender issue is really the main issue that you have with the update, one challenge that I have for you is that I would say actually that this is an issue that's very hard to be consistent about. And that's why I tried to convey there earlier that I think that the NASB translators were being as delicate and careful as possible while trying to be accommodating to current English usage. So let me just show you something quickly here so that you can see the difficulty of being consistent. So I found an example in Matthew 6:15, and I'm going to start with the King James Version. This is how it translates this verse. If you forgive not men their trespasses, neither will your Father forgive your trespasses. So the first phrase there, if ye forgive not men their trespasses. So now I'm going to go over to the NASB 77 actually, and what you'll see is it's translated very similarly here, verse 15. But if you do not forgive men, then your Father will not forgive your transgressions. If you do not forgive men, it says. And the word that is being translated there, forgive not men, is anthropos, which it says at blueletterbible.org is a dative plural masculine. So you can see why the King James and the NASB 77 translated, if you forgive not men their trespasses, if you do not forgive men. But now I'm going to go over to the NASB 95. And it says in Matthew 6:15, if you do not forgive, and they changed men, the masculine there, to others, then your Father will not forgive your transgressions. Now they did put a footnote here that the Greek is anthropoi, but the word that they used is gender neutral. And the reason I show that as an example is to say that it is really hard to be consistent if in principle you're saying, I don't ever want translators to take a masculine term and put something gender neutral there based on context, then you have to be honest and say, well, even the NASB 95 doesn't meet that particular standard, because the NASB 95, in that verse, for example, changes the word men to others, which is gender neutral. Or, probably a better way to put it, as I was saying earlier, is gender accurate, because Jesus isn't saying that you only have to forgive male human beings, men. He is saying you have to forgive others in general, male and female. That's implied by the context. And the NASB 95 reflects that actually better than the NASB 77. So this is my challenge really for people that are kind of hung up on this point. I'm not someone who's inclined to just give in to whatever, cultural fads are put out there, whatever's in fashion, and change our translations to just fit certain agendas that are prevalent in our society. I don't believe in doing that. But I really don't think that's what the NASB translators were doing in the 2020 update. I think they were doing what they did in the 95 update. They were trying to make sure that the translation is up to current English usage to be as clear as possible, but also to be faithful to the intent of the original authors. So again, I'll ask that question. If the NASB 2020 didn't have that gender accurate language, if that was not an issue, is there anything else in the NASB 2020 update that you have an issue with in a general sense? Or there's some things that you can share in the comments that you would say, no, I like the NASB 95 better because of these things. But if it does boil down to the gender issue, I hope that you might consider some of the things that I pointed out here from one of the translators, Don Wilkins, and also what I pointed out about the NASB 95, that I think you can find examples where the NASB 95 also is being gender accurate, although not to the degree that the NASB 2020 is. So I just wanted to share all of that and get feedback from people, because I know it's kind of a hot topic right now. I do also want to say, I probably should have said it earlier, that I do sympathize with NASB 95 users who love this translation, have used it for many years, and you've just grown very fond of it. It's very personal for you, and so I understand when changes are made, that is hard, and I can really sympathize with that. That being said, I just want to encourage NASB 95 users, there are still a lot of options available and that are going to be available, I think, in the foreseeable future, even if Evangelical Bible no longer produces the NASB 95 Quentel. I think that there will be Zondervan versions and Lockman editions available, and who knows, maybe others as well, as long as there's demand for it. And even Schuyler said as long as there's really good demand for it, they will continue to print the NASB 95. But I thought it would be really interesting and helpful to just share all of these things and give you some of my thoughts on it. Again, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comment section below, but thank you so much for taking some time to listen to my thoughts on this topic, brought to you from A Frisch Perspective.